Hello and welcome along to another video on the E39 V10 project. Car's back in the shed now. I've probably done about 100 miles of driving in there, found some things that don't work, so I need to sort them, and as it's a V10, fell over a power steering cooler, it's got to have the rod bearings done. I always knew that I'd have to pull the engine out again to do the rod bearings, and it was always my plan. It's horrible to have to do it, but I didn't want to do them before when I had the engine out, because it was something else to add more complication, because I'm going to be doing the high pressure Vanos line as well, and I'd hate for something to go wrong doing that when I was fitting the engine originally, and it sent me completely down another path with regards to getting the original E60 engine ECU working. So now I know that everything's working. I can pull it apart, do the rod bearings, do the high pressure Vanos line, and then if I have any issues arise, then I know it's solely to do with what I've done there, not a million and one other things that could have been done. So there's the rod bearings to do. I'm not happy with the brake pedal feel. I had noticed a slight bit of weeping around this fitting here, so I have just gone a lot tighter on that. It was already tight, but I've just nicked it up a little bit more, so maybe a little bit of air was getting in the system, so I'm going to re-bleed all the brakes. The steering didn't work. It'd work, but it had no self-rotating, self-centering. When you let go of the wheel would stay at the angle it was. And as the exhaust got more heat into the column, it would near enough sort of not seize, but it was very stiff. I mean, this is the version 1 steering setup. So that plate was mounted on the bulkhead to support the column, and it's got a nylon bushing in there. And then I had an extra spline shaft made between to go there to there and then onto the rack. And whether the UJs were over centre or they were acting against each other, but the steering was just really stiff. So what I've had to do is I've had to modify the body a bit. I managed to do this with the engine in with a junior hacksaw, and about 3 hours of my life, and I'll never get back. But it saved taking the engine out and could allow me to test the theory. So now you might be able to see I've had to cut some of the bulkhead out now, but we'll be able to see better once the engine's out. And that's a straight shot straight from the column all the way down directly onto the rack, and it's given me more header clearance as well, which is good. And that fixes steering straight away. Gave me center rotating and no sticking issues or anything like that, so that's fixed. That it just need to tidy up the bulkhead and seal the column off properly, because the original grommet won't work, but I'll get into that later. And then nice power steering cooler I had made. It doesn't look like it's liking the pressure, the way it's bellowed out. I have got the restrictor in the factory line still, but whether the core itself is up to the pressure, I'm not sure, because it's actually blown the individual fins out, which is annoying because it's a nice little item I had made. But yeah, oh well, that'll go on the shelf, and I'm going to try and fit a stock E60 M5 one into the rad pack. I might have trimmed the fixings off, I can't remember, but as soon as I start pulling into it, I'll find out what's happening. So I'm going to start by getting the front bumper off and pulling some bits off. As you saw on the time lapse, I was alright faff trying to get the drain the power steering fluid. So what I'm going to do is I've dropped the oil cooler down off its mounts. I'm going to swap the oil cooler for just a looped hose, so I can feed the oil cooler out of the way. I can drop this down and I can save as much power steering fluid out of there as I can, and if I save it, it's not going on the bloody floor. I'm also going to take the oil filter out and pray there's no copper in there, but we'll soon find out. So that's going to be my next port of call, is drop the oil out the filter housing. So they have a little drain plug in the actual filter housing just there, so you can drain the filter housing and then unscrew the cap, save it going berserk. So I'm going to do that now. I've dropped the filter as you saw on the time lapse, and the way this is sort of designed with having the filter housing lid sort of like that, any shit does normally collect in there. I mean, I did find one silver speck which was a bit concerning, just a only tiny ever so chunk, but I bloody lost it now. He was on this bit of paper, but yeah, he's gone now. But he was only very small. Wind. I haven't. There is maybe the odd speck, coppery coloured, which is a worry. But yeah, without 100% knowing the history of the engine, I know it had full service history because I got a stamped up book with it from the car, so it's been serviced in its life. As the engine was in a smash, part of the sump was damaged, so it might have lost oil at some point in its accident. So yeah, I did buy it a bit blind, and I went on the risk of that. So far not too worrying, but the be all and end all is when you start taking the caps off the rods. I mean, the oil that's come out, there is the odd copper speck here and there, but yeah, like I say, I'm just along for the ride now. Oh, there is quite a chunk there. Okay, maybe there's a bit more in here than I thought, which is worrying. But yeah, I'm along for the ride, unfortunately, and I won't know till I get the engine upside down and see what's what. So I'm going to carry on. I'm just going to drop the oil cooler off now and then finish draining the power steering. I might have a quick look at the way the new power steering cooler would go on, just see if it would work, or I might just start tearing into it because I'm a bit nervous and concerned after seeing a few specs here and there. But yeah, that's the V10 life. I should have known what I was signing myself up for. So I'm going to crack on and get all the bits dropped off. I've got all the front off now, all the rad out and all that. And the next on the list is get the air boxes off. I've still got to do exhaust and prop and gear linkage and then sort of stuff, but it's not a million miles off now. I'm probably going to take it off on the subframe because it's just easier. We're trying to get the engine up and down to try and snake it over. It's just easier with the subframe. Drop the subframe off, so I've just got to take the two wishbones out, the track rod and the drop link. So it's not too bad. With everything being new, it should come apart quite nicely. So yeah, I'm going to get cracking on bits like that then. It's the next day now. Yesterday I just cracked on, I got the engine out, the GoPro went flat, so I couldn't do any more time lapse unfortunately. But here is the big beast, upside down. The next plan is to take the sump off, so we could start getting in there and seeing what's what. Putting my faith in a Chinese engine stand. We'll see what happens. It has had an engine on it for about 2 years before and it never budged, but that was V8, so whether the weight of the extra 2 cylinders hanging over the front will make a difference, we'll soon find out. as you saw on the time lapse, I pulled the sump off. It all looks quite nice inside. No sort of caked on oil residue, so it's obviously had good service history in its life, or the oil change intervals have been good. There was no rubbish or anything collected on the from a pickup tube in there, which is good. And this pickup tube seems to be a bit dented in, so I might order a new one of them up. I'm not sure how it's dented in, but it's just, yeah, it means that some of the holes right there have opened out more, so if something was there, it will be able to pull it through easier. I've also got on the way a high pressure Vanos line, which I'm going to change just as a preventative maintenance. I'm not changing the Vanos gears, not that I can feel any play in it at all, but I need to check it with a DTI gauge before I take any of that apart. I'm going to inspect the rod bearings first of all. I'll just pull each cap off individually and see what they look like, really. I'm probably going to take the pickup tube off and save disturbing any of the oil pump till I've got all the new bits in my hand. I've got a new O-ring coming for the oil pump, because I know if you take that off you need to change the O-ring, because if it isn't seated properly after, there's a chance that it could bleed oil off there, so you might not be getting as much oil as you need to the pump. But as I said, I've got all new guides for the oil pump coming and a new spring, because I believe they changed it in late 2006. So I'm going to get on with taking the pickup tube off and having a look at making a start on the rod bearings. If you see the caps on the con rods, they've actually got a yellow dot on there, a yellow dot on there, and you've got one on that side. That is so you know the orientation that it goes back together, because the way these rods are made, they are cracked, so the rods actually have all little sort of peaks and troughs that meet together, and if you got that 180 degrees out, it would actually ruin the rod. So as long as you mark the yellow dots back up, so I'd advise taking a picture of how it is. I mean, this cylinder here, this is actually number 1. That's cylinder number 1, this side on the front. So we're going to have a look at this one first, break this off, and we'll see what's underneath. Okay, this is cylinder number 1. The crank looks good. It's got a fingerprint on there which looks like some of the marks, but the bearing is just starting to show, where it's just coming through, so that one's probably a good time to change. So I'm going to assemble this one back together and look at cylinder 2. But yeah, like I said, make sure the yellow dot is lined up, because you can see on that rod there all the little peaks and troughs. If it isn't aligned, you'd actually ruin the con rod if you put it together the wrong way. So what I'm going to do now is just pull this rod back up onto the crank, put the cap back on, and just put it up to about 20 Newton meters for now. And that'll just keep it tight while I rotate it round. I'm going to check all these before I then go and replace the bearings once they've I'm just waiting on some ARP rod bolts at the minute, so I'll do that once all the bits are here. I just want to check the crank just for peace of mind to make sure the crank's good before I go any further. Okay, this is journal number 2. There is a really small rotational mark, but there's no way you can catch your nail in it at all. Try and pick it up. You can just see it's just there, just at the tip of my finger there. It doesn't look like it's it's just literally just taken the polish away, and I don't know if it will. There you can just see down on the rod side, it's just showing copper again. So yeah, probably a good time for this one as well. Cap side showing similar wear to number one. You can just see some of the directional lines there that have been put in the crank, but with it being just literally touching the surface, and you can't catch it with your nail. I'm quite happy with that. It's not very nice to look at, as you can imagine, but I imagine with a fine polishing that probably would come out. So we'll move on to cylinder number 3. I got it wrong in my last video. That's cylinder 5, because it's 1 to 5 and 5 to 10 this side. So now this is cylinder 2. The bearing's just actually stuck to the journal there, but yeah, the crank looks good. I'm just going to pop that shell down and we'll see what the condition is. Okay, that is cylinder 2 then. Just trying to get the camera to focus. It's probably showing the most copper out we've seen, but the journal on the crank looks good. The cap is very similar to the rest. The cap looks like the best one I've seen so far, but the rod end looks the worst of the ones I've seen so far. But yeah, no scoring on the crank journal, which is good. So I'll put this one back together and move on to cylinder number 6. Okay, so this is cylinder number 6. The journal looks alright, and then if we can get the light and the camera to focus down in there, you can just see that there is a bit of copper showing on the bearing as well. So I'll assemble this one back together and move on to the next pair. So that was cylinder number 6. The crank looks good. Onto, well, not even halfway there yet, but hope so far so good. Okay, so this is cylinder 3. The crank all looks good. The bearing, you can sort of see it's run hot. It looks as if it's got a bit warm. The different colours that are in there, yeah, it's got the copper, but it's also got a bit of purple as well, which might be where it's got hot previously. So that's alright. I'm just bothered about the crank, to be fair. But yeah, that's good. So I'll assemble cylinder 3 and then start looking at cylinder number 6. Is it 6? Oh freaking hell, I've lost count. No, cylinder number 8. It's a lot more confusing when you're doing them in pairs instead of doing them in sort of cylinder order, but it's easier while you've got the journals. Just work on one sort of journal at a time and make your way back. So this is, yeah, 3 and 8. Really lost count. Right, I'll put this one back together and I'll start on number 8, this one here. But yeah, like I say, just the yellow dots. And as a bit of a sanity check, just look at the other ones that are there. They've all got the yellow dots on going one way, and the other side goes the other, so the dot should always be opposite, which is good. So this is cylinder 8, wear on the bearing as the rest of them. The crank has got one more defined line on the rotational marks, but none of them look very deep, and I can't catch any of them with my nail. They just, yeah, it's hard to catch in the camera, but there is one that looks worse than the rest. But yeah, none of them can be caught with your nail, which is good. So I'll put this one back together and move on to cylinders 4 and 9. Okay, this is cylinder number 4. There is some directional marks again, but it's just on the surface you can't feel any of them. Let me just push the rod down, and then if we look in there as well, yep, that's probably the most minimal wear. There is no copper showing on there. That's cylinder number 4 sorted, so I'll put this one back together and look at cylinder number 9. Okay, that's cylinder number 9, and the rod looks alright and the journal looks good as well. So I'll put this one back together and move on to number 5 and number 10. Okay, that's the cap for number 5, similar to all the rest, similar sort of wear. Put that down and we'll have a look at the crank. Crank all looks good. We push the rod down a bit. You can see that the wear on the wear on the bearing is good as well. So we'll put this one back together and check the last one, which would be number 10. No, that's number 10 I've done there, sorry. Yeah, that's number 10 there, and then I'll come back and check number 5. But yeah, I'm going to the last one. Okay, this is number 5. The journal looks good. Nothing under there, and then the bearing, as you can see, it's starting to go copper coloured, and that is the last one. So I'll put this one back together and we're all done. Okay, so I spun the engine back over just so any of the residual oil and that can drip out over time. Something that I wish I'd done before I rotated the engine over to take the sump off. I wish I took the sump off when it was this way up, so anything that was trapped in the sump would stay in the sump. I have had a look inside and it doesn't look like there's any chunks or bits in there. It seems weird how I found them bits in the oil filter and in the oil that come out the filter housing. My only theory is that the oil cooler came off a car which I know had let go at about 120 mile an hour and chucked a rod through the block. The oil cooler was thoroughly cleaned. I must have put nearly 5 litres of brake cleaner through it to try and make sure it was fully clean. And I'm just thinking maybe the little specks that I found were in there, because looking at the rod bearings there's no chunks missing or anything like that that I can see. I'm definitely going to look at getting a new where the gauze is and the intake pipe on the main oil pump. I'm not sure if this car's fitted with the later style Vanos gears. It's really hard to tell looking at pictures without the both of them sort of in your hand. I'm not changing them, but I am going to change the piston oil squirters to the later style, and the high pressure Vanos line, which is here. The water pump pulley is stuck on at the minute, so I'm just going to leave that to soak for a couple of days and then see if I can get it off. And yeah, I think I'm going to end this video here. Nice place to start before it starts getting rebuilt. There's still the steering shaft to sort out on the body of the car as well, which I'll save for another day. But yeah, all in all, I'm really quite pleased with the state of the crank for 98,000 miles, nearly 99,000 miles. I would say that the original bearings are where they've got, but I've seen much worse out there. So overall, buying blind sometimes pays off, but with with these engines it really does seem to be luck of the draw with what you get. So I'm going to make sure I've got all my bits ordered up ready, and then hopefully on the next video we'll be doing the rod bearings, the Vanos line, the oil squirters, and going through that. So I'll see you on the next video, and take it easy.